What's going on, everybody? I am back with a very, very, very special guest today. I've been chasing. I don't really chase too much, but I've been chasing this one. He probably doesn't even know. I've been chasing this one for years. So special, I brought my bald head today. I normally have a hat on, but I brought the baldy out, and I said it's time to go. My special guest today is from Mobile, Alabama. He just celebrated a birthday, right?
That's right.
Happy belated birthday. Went to Tuskegee University, bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering, master's in nuclear engineering.
Correct.
Yes. Went into the Air Force, worked on a stealth bomber.
That's correct.
Went into the Jet Propulsion Laboratory at NASA.
Right.
Helped out with some things over there. They needed you. Okay. That's what they told me. Worked there, started developing and revolutionized the toy gun industry with the Nerf gun and with the Super Soaker, which everybody knows about. And then now we're revolutionizing renewable energy with the JTech.
Correct.
Mr. Lonnie Johnson, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing good. How you doing?
I'm good. This is a special one for me because, first of all, engineering is something that I think we need to dive into a little bit more. We, as in black men specifically, black people as a whole, and I think Americans as a whole. You know, we spend a lot of time in entertainment and things. Like, we like to have fun.
I can't agree with you more, actually. We're in a, the way I look at it, we're in a global competition. Mm-hmm. And for a long time, people were pushing DEI for a lot of really positive and good reasons, good ideas, the right thing to do. But it's more important than that. We're in a global competition. We need all hands on deck. Mm-hmm. We need the best minds available to maintain our quality and leadership in the world, and particularly in technology.
Definitely. So, you know villains have an origin story. So what's your genius origin story? I'm sure you have one. What's the beginning for you?
Geez, I can't remember the beginning. Mm-hmm. I've been interested in engineering and technology for as long as I can remember. I was always curious about how things worked, take things apart, and would look inside. I'd take my toys apart, of course, but I'd take my sisters and brothers' toys apart too. Mm-hmm. Appliances, just always curious about what was inside and what made things tick and what made them do what they do.
Right. So how were other kids with you? Were they intimidated? Did they try to bully you? Like, how was your social life as a kid?
As a kid, it was actually a lot of fun. I'd like to compare, I don't know if a lot of your generation would be familiar with the original Little Rascal series. It was in black and white, and it was called Our Gang. Mm-hmm. And those guys always had some kind of project or activity or adventure going on, and we had our crew, and we would go out and do stuff together. Okay. We'd build go-karts. We did all kinds of projects, and just had a lot of fun. It was just a lot of adventure.
Right.
Everything from that, riding bicycles. We could literally travel all over the city and just explore different areas. And we would ride in groups or pairs, at least pairs, but a lot of times it was just, a number of us just exploring.
Nice. So what was the neighborhood like you grew up in, like the economic status?
Well, my father worked. He was an Army veteran, okay, and he had a job, government job, working at Keesler Air Force Base. So we were middle class. Okay. I would say low middle class, but middle class. Mm-hmm. It was 8 of us, 6 kids, 2 parents.
Nice.
He was a sole breadwinner, and it's amazing to me how he was able to keep all that together and keep his family together, and that had a profound impact on my outlook in terms of values. He was a deacon in the church, mm-hmm, and superintendent at the assistant superintendent for our Sunday school. Okay. And so we went to church every Sunday. So it was instilled a lot of wholesome values. Mm-hmm. And he was my idol. I really admired him for the value that he brought to his family in terms of his perspective.
Wow. That's great to hear, first of all. Middle class.
I felt very fortunate that he was there. At the same time, in our neighborhood, we would be playing. The kids in our neighborhood, within a block there, in fact, some kids from around the corner and so forth, we would be out in the street in front of the house playing stickball or foursquare or whatever, games and so forth. But when we would see a police car, we would always run and hide, not realizing why we did it,
Right.
but we knew instinctively or felt instinctively that the police was not someone that we trusted. But that's what it was like. In our neighborhood, there had been white families in that area before we moved in, and they moved out, so we had that experienced all of that. But there was a family that lived around the corner from us. Our backyards were together, and I can remember times when Johnny, I can't remember his name, but I'm using that. We would hear him getting spankings
For playing
with us.
Wow.
Yes, that was what it was like.
Wow.
We were seen as not worthy.
This is 1950s Alabama.
This was in the early 60s. Actually late 50s, early 60s time frame, late 50s time frame. We were small kids then.
That was a serious time. At that time, what was the, I guess, racial makeup of the Mobile? Was it 50-50?
I was probably about 8 or 10 years old. Had no concept of what.
Well, I meant when you got a little bit older.
When I got older, in my neighborhood, it was all predominantly black. It was. Those people who were there because they had not been able to move out when others did, and even my high school, all the way through high school, was pre-integration rather. It was still segregated. So, we did. There was not a lot of interaction that way. Yeah.
So who were your mentors? I know you said your dad was your idol. Did you have other mentors that that kind of help you lean towards engineering?
We had teachers who believed in us, which I think was very, very important, because that's where that feedback is so important to your self-esteem and seeing greatness in us, and of course preparing us for what we were going to see when we went out into the world. I think people, teachers, even my high school principal, they all recognized me as being a little bit different in terms of my curiosity and interest in science and so forth, and they nurtured that.
Right. I heard you tell a story about getting in trouble for some jet fuel, and what was it? What grade was that? 10th grade.
I was. That would have been about the 10th grade, I think. Yes. President Kennedy had made his moon speech in '62. I was about 12 years old then, and but I was fascinated with the idea of going to the moon, and I hung on every word. I listened to his speech very attentively, thinking about how old I would be before the decade was out, which is the expression he was using. So that would have been within the 8 years we were going to put a man on the moon, and the rockets and the ability to do that, we didn't know how to do it, and there are a lot of materials that we're going to need that don't exist yet. And he just talked about how hard it was going to be, but he also said that was why we were going to do it, because it's hard. It's a worthwhile task and worthwhile undertaking. And that's kind of what kind of motivates me even now in terms of taking on tough challenges, worthwhile challenges, and applying myself in a useful and productive way, because this is, engineering to me is the path, and technology is how we improve quality of life for everybody.
Right. So you make it through high school, and you decide, I want to go to Tuskegee. How do you make that decision? There's a lot of schools you're a genius. They know about you now. So how do you choose Tuskegee?
Actually, I don't know how many knew about me or what that was about. I had participated in a math talent search in Alabama. It was an Alabama math talent search, and so this organization would send out these tests every month or so, and it was basically a math challenge. It was a brain teaser is what I would refer to it, but it was not closed book anything, so you could find whatever resources you needed to find in order to solve the problem and figure out a solution, and then submit the solution. And so I participated in that program and ranked in the top 40 in the state, which was cool, which obviously I felt very good about. Went to Spelman College. No, Stillman College. I'm at Stillman in Alabama. Stillman College, and in a summer program there for the kids who actually had done well on that talent search. Took some classes. The only other time I was exposed to a college in fact, through high school was at the University of Alabama. My senior year in high school, I built this robot and participated in a junior engineering exposition and conference, and it had engineering in the title, and I thought it was just a big deal. I'm going to participate in this, and submitted my robot. Was there at the University of Alabama. It turned out this was in '68. I was the only black student there. My robot won first place, so it was a major moral and personal victory for me. And it was put on by the School of Engineering, but they didn't express any interest in my attending the university. Nobody even asked what my grades were. I even talked to my teachers about that, who were there with me, of course. But Dr. Scavellas from Tuskegee had actually come to my school and on a recruiting trip and had identified me, offered me a math scholarship. So I went to Tuskegee on a math scholarship. In fact, I think Tuskegee was the only school I actually applied to attend.
Nice. And they have, of course, the great history with the founding.
It was a great experience as well. Yeah. When I got to Tuskegee, I think it was during my first semester that I changed my major from math to engineering. Okay. Which was disappointing for Dr. Scavellas, but he understood and accepted my decision.
Mm-hmm. Great decision.
my scholarship was coming out of his budget,
right?
Which I really appreciated him understanding that was my passion and really what I was about.
Yeah. So a lot of people feel that they're a little bit on the fence about going to HBCUs when it comes to engineering. I don't think a lot of them know how good some of the education is at some of these HBCUs when it comes to engineering. So what would you say to people a little bit scared about, should I go to an HBCU or should I go to a PW?
What's interesting about that, when I graduated Tuskegee, my first job, I had gone through ROTC, so I had been commissioned as an officer in the Air Force. And so I knew I was going to be called to active duty. Mm-hmm. But I graduated a little bit earlier, so I had about 6 months before I was being called. And so I took a job. I went to work at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. And there I was partnered with another engineer. I think he had graduated from Penn State with a master's in nuclear engineering as well. And so we worked as a team. And I found that I was better prepared than he was.
Really?
I had been exposed to things that he had not seen. And it got to the point where we were supposed to be working together on this project, but he was withholding information because he was a bit intimidated.
Wow.
And was trying to keep me from getting ahead of having my ability to solve problems and seen as being an advantage over what he was able to do. Right. So I felt that I had been well prepared, and that really gave me a lot of confidence having that experience. Yeah. Because you get out of school and you want to know how you're going to stack up as a fair competition, fair consideration. But what I found, quite honestly, in reality, you get out of your education what you put into it. Mm-hmm. If you work, I was curious about a lot of things. I studied things because I wanted to know, I wanted to understand, I wanted to be prepared. Mm-hmm. So if you were going to college to prepare yourself, your experience will be different from going to have fun.
Right.
Which is what some people do.
Too many people do.
Yes.
So,
and I think, in reality, being prepared, getting a good education, because that's what's going to work. Some people can be friends with folk and have relationships. Mm-hmm. A lot of times those relationships won't be available to you.
Right.
So you got to be able to open the door. And I had an instructor, in fact, who was very animated in making sure I understand that, grades get your foot in the door, but after you're in the door, it's up to you to make the difference. You can get in. So your ability to produce is what's going to really make a difference.
Mm-hmm. How do you go mechanical to nuclear? What's that?
Well, I had a professor Dr. Levert, who encouraged me to pursue my nuclear degree. Tuskegee had a nuclear engineering program. He actually had a nuclear reactor on campus at the time.
In the 70s?
In the 70s, yes.
Wow.
Dr. Levert was one of the first in fact, I think the first black PhD in nuclear engineering in the country.
Wow.
And he was teaching there at Tuskegee.
And he was like a mentor, pretty much.
He was a mentor. And along the way, different mentors at different times, depending on where I was and what I was experiencing.
Mm-hmm. So you go nuclear, and then now it's time to go Air Force because you've graduated now.
Right.
So now we know with the ROTC program, they pretty much put you through college, and now you got to do your part.
I had an Air Force scholarship going through college, some work study, lab assistant, a number of different things, some loans. So now on active duty in the Air Force, my first assignment was in Albuquerque at Kirkland Air Force Base, which at the time it was the Air Force Weapons Laboratory.
Okay.
They actually had airborne lasers back then, and I was assigned to a nuclear group that looked at U.S. space launches. So this is when I was formally introduced to the space program. We were doing a launch analysis for the Voyager mission. Voyager was launched in 1977. Voyager is still in interstellar space at this point, sending data back. It's still alive. It's a nuclear-powered spacecraft.
Nice.
But so U.S. launches that use nuclear power sources because of the risk of a failure during launch, there was concern about releasing nuclear material to the biosphere. And so we'd go through these analyses, second-guess the engineers that were actually designing the system, looking for things that would go wrong, and making sure that there was no rock unturned. We wanted to make sure we looked at everything.
Like QA type of thing.
Making sure that we had taking the minimized risk to the best extent possible. I did some orbit insertion analysis that NASA had gone on record saying that that once we were at a certain point in the launch sequence, there was no way for the spacecraft to return to Earth and actually burn up coming into the atmosphere. But I did some analysis that showed that indeed could happen.
Right.
And as a result, I got offered a job to go to a Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, of course. It was a tough decision. Do I get out of the Air Force or do I continue the military career? And it was a tough decision. There were a lot of positive reasons for continuing to pursue both.
Right.
Went to JPL, and it was a real great experience. I was assigned to the Galileo mission. Galileo went to Jupiter. I was a power systems engineer on that spacecraft, which meant that I was the guy that was responsible for integrating the nuclear power source onto the spacecraft, managing its integration on managing the power allocations to all the instruments, going through mission scenarios, looking at different phases of the missions, and making sure that we had enough power to do all the functions that we need to do at a given point, making sure that, and actually managing how much power was allocated to all the subsystems, which meant that, if someone needed more power for their instrument to work or their computer to work, they'd have to come to me because I was managing and allocating it. And so I was I want to say accountant, but I was budgeting everybody's power consumption. And so we need to make sure everybody stayed within their allocation so we'd have enough power for everybody to do the things that the spacecraft needed to accomplish.
Nice. Now, I joined the Navy in 2008.
Oh,
okay. I tried to do the nuclear thing. It didn't work. So I was one level below was a nuclear engineer in the Navy, which is a radar technician. But anyway, the Navy was a little bit racially funny in 2008, right? So I can't imagine what it was like for you back in, the 70s. What was that like racially?
It was not good. I mean, but then at the same time, there were things. Yeah, I managed to make friends. Again, thinking back on my education and the things I was able to do, I would like to think that I managed to garner a good bit of respect because of my ability and skills. The people. When you're needed and you're valuable, people will appreciate you more. But I had my experiences, obviously. I mean, I shudder to think when sometimes I hear people saying, "Well, I've never been discriminated against." I'm like, that's just because you don't you don't realize it, or you were too slow to pick up on what was happening to you. But I had one point. I had a coworker ask me, "Lonnie, you ever wish you were white?" And I'm like, okay. I'm thinking about all the times I've been the only guy in the room who looked like me and feeling different and all of this. And I looked at him. And I thought, Rob, I think it would be really cool if you guys were all black.
That's a better
because being the only person in the room and being treated different and looked at different even. I mean, even when I went to JPL initially, I could sense the low expectations.
Really?
And so after a while, you kind of use that to kind of lay back and observe and pick up on things, and you find out what the lay of the land is. Then you start to exercise some assertiveness and start making some moves, and people realize, at one point on Galileo, the memory keep alive, which was an invention I came up with that people were saying wouldn't work, and I said, well, they're going to tell you it won't work. When they tell you that, I'll go home and build one in my garage and bring it in and demonstrate it. They weren't about to be embarrassed that way.
Right.
So they agreed to pursue it, and of course made it work. I had people come up to me and actually apologize to me for the things they were saying about me and my idea behind my back. Right. They never would say what they assumed someone that told me, but no one did.
They just apologized. Guilty conscience.
They were apologizing for some of the negative things that they were saying. So I was going to say at one point, when we would have our design reviews, when NASA would come in and quarterly review the status of the spacecraft development design process and everything, we'd have all these action items and things that were issues and improvements in the design, things like that. And at one point, I think just about everything on the list was something I was working on. When I got in the Air Force, you have a problem that gets kicked around it's important to the command level, and then it trickles down. Eventually, it ends on the low junior officer's desk. And I took this project and turned it into a really, really impactful program. And people would rotate into the office, new assignees and things like that. And look, how did you get so lucky to get assigned a project like this? It's because I took something nobody else wanted and turned it into something that was valuable and useful. But that's what you got to do. You got to assert yourself. You got to take the initiative and take some risk, because sometimes you're going to be wrong.
Right.
Sorry.
Hey, see, I love it. So at NASA, did you ever run into Katherine Johnson?
No.
No? What is it about the Johnson name at that time? Just Johnson, NASA is just revolutionizing things. What was going on? Was it special energy at that time or what?
No.
Probably a lot of Johnsons over there, huh?
It's like, well, the Johnson Space Center is at your response.
I know. NASA might not. What was your favorite part of, the journey from NASA and the Air Force? What was your favorite part?
Thing about that, when I got out of the Air Force and went to Pasadena, working on space, I really enjoyed that. And I felt I was growing and learning a lot. But there were some things about the military that I had missed. So I decided to go back on active duty. So I actually went back on active duty to put the uniform back on. And second time when I was assigned to Strategic Air Command. What was then Strategic Air Command? I think it's called Strike Command now. Okay. But I was at the headquarters there in Omaha, Nebraska. My role was to advocate for space systems that would support SAC's mission. SAC, Strategic Air Command, is the nuclear command, or was the nuclear command, Strike Command now. Strategic was synonymous with nuclear.
Okay.
And but we had this technology using GPS and very high accuracy. We figured out that you could take out critical targets with a strategic weapon that could hit a critical component without having the massive destruction of a nuclear blast.
Okay.
And so I coined the phrase literally non-nuclear strategic weapon, because everything up to that point was nuclear strategic. And so I advocated for these programs. Some of them I don't know if they're still classified or not, so I don't talk about them specifically. And it was around that time that Space Command was created, because what the military and the government wanted to do was for space was to have a defensive posture, if you will, instead of, because strike command, strategic command, air command was, this is a strike force. This is all of the nuclear-based submarines, land-based intercontinental ballistic nuclear missiles, and even the airborne bombers that carried nuclear weapons were all controlled from that command. And so Space Command was created because space was viewed and was to be viewed as a defensive command. So it was initially moved out of SAC to NORAD, North American Defense Command at the time. And then, of course, now Space Command is being spun out of that. But in any case, the whole idea was have a defensive posture on space. I remained at SAC, though.
Liked it.
And then after that assignment, I was reassigned to Edwards Air Force Base. The stealth bomber, the B-2, was being developed at the time. And I was assigned as the first flight test engineer on the stealth bomber program, assigned by the Strategic Air Command.
So while this is going on, somehow in your free time, you start developing a heat pump. How do you have free, not just free time, but you have free mental space?
Yeah, when I was at JPL, would go home and work on my own projects, and I was developing a heat pump, and the idea was to come up with a solution to the environmental problem. Heat pumps, refrigeration systems use Freon as a working fluid, and I thought, geez, what could be more environmentally friendly than water?
Right.
So I wanted to develop a heat pump that would use water as a working fluid. So I was doing experiments, and I got this idea of, I hooked this hose up to the bathroom faucet. I machined some nozzles, and these are things I was doing at home when I would, in the evenings and on weekends and things. I would just work on projects and ideas. And I shot the stream of water across the bathroom and into the bathtub, and it was just so gratifying. It was a little small stream of water, but it was very powerful. And it was, I think, geez, this was a high-performance water gun would really be a lot of fun and be cool. So the kid kind of came out.
Right.
So I was at JPL at that time, but I didn't really start working on it until I went back into the Air Force. I had to move to Omaha from Pasadena. Got my family settled in and everything, and set up my shop in the basement. And then that's when I started actually building the first gun.
This is what year? 82-ish?
82.
Early 80s?
Yeah, that was
Okay.
1982, yes.
So you're developing, I want to go back a little bit to something. What got you to care and be so passionate about energy efficiency and just the environment at that time? Because this is before it was like a big conversation, really.
I guess a combination of things. One, energy, always fascinated with that. Maybe that goes back to rockets and in high school building robots. It was all about energy, because even the robot, I had to power it and come up with creative ways of powering it, because for the I want to call it a computer, but the robot had literally a mechanical computer where the switches, instead of they were all relays and switches that would decode signals that I would send to it. That was battery powered. But to move its arms and move around on its space and do other things I had little graspers, but those were all pneumatic. And so I had a compressed air tank that I would take to a service station filled with compressed air and put that inside the robot, so the compressed air could move its arms. And I needed a battery so he could actually move around. I needed a battery to power the electronics and so forth. So the energy was what makes things work. That's the energy. So I've had this long-term interest in energy, and of course a long-term fascination with novel solutions to things and novel ways of doing things, and just fascinated with it. But the environmental issue, as an inventor or somewhere along the way, I felt that I'd been given a gift, and I felt that it would be a sin to waste it, squander it. So I really wanted to apply myself toward addressing some useful problems and challenges. So the environment, obviously, for me anyway, as a scientist, being tuned into what's going on in the world, I really realized even back then that the environment is a critical area, that in global warming could change everything. And so I started working in that space.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. First of all, you come up with so we know about the super soaker. It comes out of the attempt to invent a new heat pump,
Yeah.
right?
Even in the 70s, when the first Arab oil embargo happened, and we had long lines, people waiting for gasoline, and even in the 70s, people were starting to talk about the impact that fossil fuels were having on the environment.
Okay.
And I would tune in to watch some of the congressional hearings to see what was going to be done, and I would sit there just totally frustrated when these guys would be stymie any attempt to even get the hearing moving forward and getting people to testify and sharing any information. It was just frustrating to me watching the fact that the politics were getting in the way of progress.
Right. So when you invent things, right, I want to go overview type. When you invent things, is it because you were looking for something and couldn't find it, or are you looking to solve problems that we just don't have solutions for?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, inventing, everything builds on everything else. You know, for example, soon we'll get to some point working on talking about the technology we're working on now. When I came up with the idea for the J-Tech, the materials that we needed to make it work didn't exist.
The
same thing for some of the battery technology. The materials, you have these ideas, you know what needs to happen, but the materials, I sometimes, when I talk about that issue, I use Leonardo da Vinci as an example because he had, if you've seen some of his drawings of a man-powered flight where he had these wings and stirrups and had drawings of a human being actually being able to fly. He had the vision, but the materials and the know-how didn't exist.
Right.
It took about 500 years before we actually had someone able to build an airplane that could be powered by a human being and actually lift off and fly.
Right.
That was the Gossamer Condor. So 500 years for the technology to mature. So visions can last over generations. Problems that exist, it may take generations to solve sometimes, depending on what it is, but certainly the evolution of technology, the evolution of know-how, we build on that. You know, when I talk to kids, I talk about how human beings are built. Your problem solving is what we do best.
Right.
It's what we do. We're built to solve problems. And so, you know, it just comes natural. I think we're all inventors. Everybody's an inventor. The difference is who follows through and who has the determination to stick to a problem until it comes to fruition.
Now, you invent this super soaker. You eventually go on to partner up with Laramie.
Yes.
Right. Where did you get the mindset from to say, I'm going a licensing route? I don't want to manufacture this thing myself. I want to work with somebody, let them manufacture it, give me a piece. How did you come across this idea?
That was a lesson learned, just like everything else.
Really?
You know, you point yourself in a direction. I knew I wanted to get this. I had the gun. I built the first prototype. You know, it took a few weeks to build the first one. You know, it's funny thing about that, you know, I knew what I wanted it to do. And so I designed it to be a high performance, high pressure, large water stream, and all those things. I put the engineering know-how. But it was several weeks before I actually had made all the components, put them all together, and had the first gun completed.
Right.
And so it wasn't until then that I pumped it up and pulled the trigger that I actually saw how well it was going to work. And it was really, really cool. So my first impulse was to manufacture it myself and set up production for it. And go into business because of my experience at that point in life, entrepreneurship, having graduated from Tuskegee and having that outlook, I wanted to have my own business. I went and talked to some injection molding companies and got estimates for what it would cost to actually set up production. And the estimate came back, it was going to cost $200,000 to get the first 1,000 guns off the production line. And I'm like, I don't have $200,000, but that's only 1,000 guns. And who's going to pay $200 for a water gun?
Right.
That
cost.
It didn't make any sense.
You got to mark it up still.
Yeah, and I didn't have any. Yeah, so I didn't understand tooling amortization and all of those kind of things. But I said, okay, there's some things I don't know and I don't understand that I need to learn, because up until that point, all of my professional experience had been government large-scale projects where cost was not so much the issue.
Right.
So I would go into toy stores and I would see toys there that were, even more complicated than my gun, and but didn't cost $200. So I felt there were some things I needed to learn. So I decided at that point that I would license. Now, another part of that decision, though, is the risk associated with putting your idea out and having someone take it and run with it and leaving you out. But I decided that, I needed to learn, and I was willing to pay the tuition. I was willing to lose in order to gain the knowledge. And so I put it out there, and fortunately, I didn't get ripped off. I did have some patent protection at the time, and that's, I think, was the one thing that kept them from trying to rip me off.
Right.
So we ended up, there were at least 2 lawsuits involved in the project. At least 2. One where we sued another company that was trying to produce the water guns who were infringing the patent, so we won that one. And the other one was Laramie deciding they had paid me enough money, so I had to sue them to enforce the contract. Had a similar, and Laramie was sold to Hasbro and had a similar issue there. I ended up filing a lawsuit because they were not paying the royalties consistent with the way the contract was written, so I had to enforce that. So the litigation, all of this was a learning experience.
Right. It's amazing that you learned it, and we can kind of look at you and say, all right, Mr. Johnson took this route. We don't always have to produce everything that we make, because that's a struggle that even though we saw what went on with you, we still want to produce. If it's my idea, I want to bring it to market.
I want to control this in my base. That's the other thing that I encourage people. Now, I took it for granted that, okay, if this gets, I'm going to come up with ideas. I'm going to be an inventor. I remember telling someone when I was in the Air Force I wanted to be an inventor. They said, "Oh no, those guys are like celebrities. You'll never be an inventor." Those guys are 1 in a million. So okay, but I managed to arrive. I guess when I was at JPL and the memory power supply, I mentioned my experience at Oak Ridge. But at JPL, when that invention was successful and we got it on the spacecraft, and the whole idea that I created something that people were saying wouldn't work and it was now going to another planet, that was a big deal for me personally. Yeah. And I felt like I had arrived. And after the stealth bomber and even going back to JPL, and I worked on the Cassini mission to Saturn, I literally had started to burn out. I was looking for a new challenge. I worked these major systems and things, and I also felt that, these were national initiatives, meaning that the U.S. government was doing this and those missions were going to succeed whether I was there or not.
Right.
I wanted to do some things where I personally was going to be able to make a difference and would depend on me personally. And so, that's basically has led me to where I am at this point.
Well, you were making a difference anyway in the military, whether you got paid per unit or not. You still made a big difference. But it's something funny about
well, that's like saying, well, if I'm not there, will the war still be won? I think the U.S. war.
We would have won still. But you did make a big impact.
Oh, yeah, I made an impact. And I felt that, I learned a lot from the experience and wanted to apply it in a different way. I wanted a new challenge, basically.
And it's a big difference from going from structured, first of all, college, structured for a young person. Then you go military, very, very structured. So you don't have a whole lot of wiggle room for messing up. You just follow the guidelines and you'll be pretty good.
Follow the guidelines and you'll be okay. Strategic Air Command was a stressful experience for me because, think about it. I was on the staff of a 4-star general who was responsible for all 3 legs of the U.S. nuclear triad. Very conservative. independent thinking was not well thought of.
Right.
Highly, I mean, what was valued there was towing the line, being responsible, being safe. And here I am thinking of new ways to do things. And outside the box, and so that was hard. That was really hard. But I learned. I brought that up to say that there were times when we would go into meetings with the general, and my immediate commander would look at me and say, "Johnson, don't say a word."
Scare somebody.
And it turned out to be good advice, because it's pretty easy to get in trouble.
It is, especially at that time.
Yeah. So you had military experience. So you know what I'm talking about.
I didn't know. But I didn't actually. I'm from Ohio originally, so they don't do the best at teaching low Black history up there. So I learned about you actually as an adult. I was doing some research on advanced new battery technology, and what I was really looking at was graphene.
Okay.
You know about that. So, and then somehow I just came across what you were doing in about 2016 with a new battery you were creating.
Okay.
Right. So, what led you to the battery technology? And I know you had this advanced battery you were talking about some years ago was slow discharge, fast charge up. And how did you can get technical with this one.
So when I got, let's see, when I moved to Atlanta after Super Soaker was successful and I was ready to set up my laboratory, my first project was to go back to that project that I was working on when I came up with the idea for Super Soaker, the new heat pump that would use water as a working fluid. And I hired some professors at Georgia Tech as consultants, and they were working with me. And one of them had a friend who was in batteries and asked me if I'd be interested in talking with him. And it turned out they were looking for investors, and but I did meet with them. They were out of Wisconsin. They were based in Wisconsin, actually, and ended up traveling, meeting the Sid Megahead was his name. He had been a CTO at Rayovac, major battery company, and he had spun out on his own. He had this lithium-ion battery technology, polymer lithium-ion that he was developing. A lot of people excited about lithium-ion at the time. I did a deal with him, but I also thought and felt that, if I'm going to, there's a lot of activity, a lot of people interested in this, and lithium-ion was emerging at the time. It was a new thing everybody was excited about, and I felt that if I got into that, I'd be also ran as a small-time inventor, and so, what's the next thing beyond lithium-ion? And I found this solid-state thin-film battery technology at Oak Ridge National Laboratory that you made in vacuum chambers by sputter deposition, if you're familiar with that. That's literally in a vacuum chamber where you use a plasma, argon plasma, to bombard a surface and knock material off one surface and have it coat onto another. You make these batteries by different layers coating, and the whole battery would be 7 microns thick. And for those people who might not know relate to that, a sheet of paper is about 100 to 150 microns. So this whole battery, if you rub your finger across it, you wouldn't feel it there, but you could charge it and discharge it. When I would calculate the volume of it and look at how much energy it was storing, it was at the time about 4 times the amount of energy you could store with lithium-ion. So my idea was to scale that technology and actually go after cell phones and things like that. But it turned out that it took too much energy to make the battery. It was too slow, so the throughput and capital costs, it was just not an economical solution. So rather than give up, I decided to develop solid-state batteries. This all was about 25 years ago. Well, actually a little bit more than 25 now. But so rather than give up, I decided, okay, this is going to be the next thing beyond lithium-ion. I'm going to develop this technology. I'm going to get the intellectual property in place and everything, and then wait on the industry to realize that this is the thing. And that's where we are. We have working solid-state batteries. It has taken literally all of that time. There are companies who came out with claiming that they had solid-state batteries, but it turns out that they have hybrids. They still have liquid electrolyte in those cells, and so they're not, the performance is not quite what our cells will have. One of the biggest challenges with lithium batteries, lithium-ion, is the use of the liquid electrolyte, which is basically an alcohol. And when you have a battery failure, internal short, or even overheating it, the alcohol, will start to build up pressure by evaporating inside this can, and it will rupture the can. And if you're at high temperature, you got a fire now, that heats up the battery next to it, and that's why you see the Tesla fires run away. And then, of course, the fire department comes and puts water on the fire, and lithium reacts with water to produce hydrogen, which burns, and so you end up, you can't really put it out with fire with water. So anyway, so now we have this solid state battery technology that it's taken literally all of this time. They're still being made by PhD level scientists in the laboratory, but we have what looks like the best technology. QuantumScape is one of our competitors that we look at sometimes. They announced that they had a solid state battery. They hit just because people appreciate and understand the potential impact of that. They shot up to. They went public and hit about $44 billion in value.
We're going public eventually, guys.
Yeah,
Be ready.
They did.
Be ready for it.
And they didn't. It's still, they have liquid electrolyte, is my understanding there, and they're pre-revenue, so not really no sales yet. But that was the value. They're back down around 2 or 3 at this point. But that was just the hype and level of excitement that solving that problem engendered.
So the industry is waiting on you guys. That's pretty much what it's saying. If they were that excited about them and they still kind of use liquid a little bit, then the industry is really waiting on this solid state, true solid state,
yes,
battery.
There are other companies that are using ceramics. I mean, we worked with just about all of the materials that we see other people working with at this point. We've worked with those materials and abandoned them over the years. Okay, that's just the reality. But that's what happens. I guess I'm lucky for having worked on this for 25 years. But I've been accused of being lucky before. But it's just hard work, and it's just setting a goal and persevering. I don't know if I knew it would take 25 years if I would have taken it on. I don't know if I would have applied the resource the way I did and the approach that I had. But then, if you don't know the answer, and so you have to take the risk, and the risk is where the reward comes. And for me, being able to invest in myself and believing in myself is what allowed me to take that risk and apply the resources. So investing the revenue from Super Soaker with the goal of taking things to another level. That's where we are.
And this is another level for sure, because we in developing this battery technology for 25 plus years, we come up with the J-Tech.
Yes. So that got me into electrochemistry, right? But let me make a point here before we go there. When people say 25 years working on something, well, from the time I got the idea for Super Soaker to the time that I had an actual deal, it was 7 years, and then #1 selling toy in the world in 10 years from the time I got the idea. So this is a lot harder. Yeah,
it's a lot harder, and it's bigger implications. It's not a toy.
Right. So the J-Tech is sort of a marriage of electrochemistry, which I learned in getting into batteries. Again, learning, reading technical papers, journals, educating myself. I think for me, probably the most important thing I got from my education is how to educate myself and how to learn and teach myself. But this was a situation where my formal education in mechanical engineering and my self-taught education in electrochemistry came together. I'd taken a lot of electronics classes as well, so I knew a lot of electronics, but the electrochemistry part of it was new. But when I saw, after learning some things about that, the idea had occurred to me that I could merge the two technologies. And so in an engine, the way an engine works, car engine, jet engine, even steam engine, steam turbines and nuclear power plants, all the same basic thing. You compress the working fluid at low temperature and you heat it up and expand at high temperature. So a power plant, they'll pump water to high pressure, send it through a boiler, turn it into steam, and expand the steam at high temperature through a turbine. In your car engine, you pull air in at low temperature, compress it, inject fuel, burn the fuel, heat it up, and expand at high temperature. You get a lot more work out of high temperature expansion than it takes to compress. And so the JTEC is a heat engine, but instead of using turbines and pistons to do the compression and expansion process, I use electrochemistry. So it's a lot like a battery and conducting ions across a membrane and so forth. A lot of that's the same related technology. So it's a heat engine that turns heat directly into electricity. It's all solid state and no moving mechanical parts, and more efficient than existing engines. So what I focus on right now is actually bringing the cost down so that we can deliver the magic at a price that people are willing to pay.
The JTEC, do you consider it a device or a system? What is it?
Device or system.
Like, would you call it a thing, or is it like this system of things makes a JTEC?
It's a new thing.
Okay.
It's not something that existed before. Nobody had an engine that didn't have moving mechanical parts. The only thing that's close to it is a thermoelectric device, which is very, very low. The power generators on the spacecraft that I worked on use thermoelectric devices. These are semiconductor devices where you heat one side and cool the other, and that temperature difference gives you electricity. But you could only get, like, the best Galileo would have at launch was that like 8% of that heat given off by the nuclear power source could be converted into electricity. Just 8%, less than 10%. What we're looking at with JTEC is more like 40%.
Wow.
In that, I mean, a whole different ballgame.
So we're dealing with 40%, what we call efficiency?
40% of, yes. So in an engine, you're limited by what's called the Carnot principle. So it's the potential efficiency that you can achieve depends on the temperature that the heat source is provided to you, the difference in temperature over which you're operating. So for that system, it could actually be much higher than 40% because the RTGs on Galileo, I think they were around over 1,000 degrees centigrade. Very, very high temperatures at that interface to the heat source. These things would literally glow in the dark. They were so hot. And they would just glow that way continuously. Galileo's been, Voyager was launched in 1977, and those RTGs are still hot and still generating power for that spacecraft. But that's the advantage of a nuclear power source. So, but still, the point is that what the technology we have would be as reliable as those converters, but a whole different ball games in terms of the amount of heat. So for a spacecraft, the power system can be a lot smaller and lighter. And anyone who does space systems, they know weight is the key. You know, it takes a lot to get a pound into space. So if you can reduce the weight of a spacecraft, that reduces the cost more than exponentially, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's a huge payoff.
At this stage in our life, at this stage in business, are we looking to manufacture? Is this a product we're looking to get to a small enough size? You talked about size, right? So where we can manufacture, we still want to?
For the JTEC?
Yes.
The JTEC, we're looking at the full gamut. Think of any engine anywhere, anyway. You have heat, you need electricity. So one of our major investors, for example, is an oil and gas company, and they have a lot of abandoned oil wells across the southwest U.S. Thousands of them, literally. They got all the oil out, but there's geothermal heat down those wells. It's low temperature heat in the range of 100 degrees centigrade or so, 150 degrees, in that range. And so they were looking for a way of converting that low temperature heat into electricity because they did an analysis and concluded that just 20% of the abandoned oil wells in the country could supply all the U.S. power needs. And we have technology that could do that. So that's why they made a major investment here and why we're in this environment. And so from major utility type scale power generation, even for a nuclear power plant, having something that's more efficient than a steam turbine. One of our major investors is the prior CEO of the Southern Company, and they have, their plants are only have a certain level of efficiency in the range of about 30%. We can take waste heat from that plant and produce additional power, and we would improve the overall output of that plant by about 30%.
Nice.
So think of an existing plant where you've already got the fuel and paid all the costs and everything is balanced. Now you come in and attach this device and produce more electricity than it's almost like, I won't say free, but it has huge impact. We, early on, some of the analysis I did suggested that we could even use body heat, the difference between your body temperature and ambient air as a source of energy. So one of the things that I hope to get to at some point is having a jacket that you can wear that would charge your cell phone, but also if you get cold, you could flip a switch and it would be a heat pump and it would warm you up or cool you off as a heat pump, as a have a personal air conditioner. So there's just so many things you can do with the technology, but we've got to get it out of the laboratory. We've got to get the company built, and then we can have the resources to exploit it. So our investor at this point came in because we were able to do a proof of concept demo, and he actually saw it work. And so now we're scaling it, but we're looking at large scale applications initially, looking at waste heat from other engines.
Nice. Who's the, I guess, target for JTech? Are we looking at, are we saying we want to go to utility companies? Do we want people who have residences to buy eventually at some point, get a JTech and power their house? Like who's our goal? Is it everybody?
All the above.
All the above.
This
like
is it's a whole new. Paul Werbos, who's the former NASA program manager, described it as like discovering a new territory. That's the whole new way of producing power.
Wow, that's amazing. So let me switch gears a little tiny bit. Politics. Do you get involved? Do you get involved at all? When I say involved, I mean out loud. You get out loud involved. Not who you vote for, I mean, but policy level.
Oh yeah, I have strong opinions politically. Okay. Yeah, absolutely, and I'm involved.
How do you feel about current energy policy? Do you feel it supports what you're doing? Do we need change to get what you have?
Well, because people have strong opinions and people are, we're a startup company who's looking for investors. I've been asked by existing investors to be careful about being in terms of expressing my political opinions. But I will say that there's one candidate who, we've seen recently some impacts from climate change, right? I think everybody's starting to acknowledge that there's something going on with the environment that's different from what we've seen in the past.
Yes.
But we're also aware that there's one candidate for president who, while in office, one of the first things they did was to withdraw the U.S. from the Paris Accords, the climate Paris Accords, which to me was a huge disappointment because it's like an irresponsible thing to do. For political reasons, for whatever. And one party I've noticed over the years have been, and I understand. I mean, I'm now learning a lot about business. I understand how things work. I understand that you can't just drop everything. Kamala Harris is now saying that she will not stop fracking, and that's understandable because you can't just, if you say everybody's going to drive an electric car, but everybody's got gasoline cars. You can't just, there's no...
Don't work like that.
It makes no sense, right? You can't just pull the plug out of the economy and then say, okay, we're going to tear everything up and then start billing over and just leave it makes no sense. It's irrational. You can't just bring about big change like that. Things have to happen gradually over time. People have to adapt. The problem is that people get comfortable and used to doing things a certain way, and they don't want to change, and they see problems with change. It's going to be discomfort for some people. Mm-hmm. Some people are going to be winners and losers and all of this stuff. Unfortunately, but it's change that has to happen, and so it just needs to be done in a responsible way.
Right.
You can't pull the rug out from people and expect everything to be okay. That's not the real world. You can't have people going to work every day and all of a sudden the jobs disappear because we're not going to do this anymore. Mm-hmm. You have to do that in small chunks, bites,
phases,
and give them a chance to get to a new job, mm-hmm. and then you do another one. And you gotta have a transition. You can't just have a step function where everything is going to be new. But it causes, when people talk about change, though, it causes people to have a lot of fear and apprehension about, okay, well, this is scary, it's unknown, what's going to happen, and people will tend to recoil. Right. I think it's fair to say that what it means to be conservative in America is a whole new thing now.
It's changing.
It's a whole new thing. But yeah, I do have strong opinions. I do have fears about what the country will be like if the wrong person's running it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I won't lean too much into it. We're trying to get investors. We need J-Tech in the market. But I did have a question about, I feel like it's kind of political, but it's not, politics.
Okay.
Who or what do you consider competition for J-Tech Energy, like the company, not just the device, but just, is there, who's like, hey, I need to get past them, or, if you can say.
Well, I don't. I have not, quite honestly, I have not identified a competition for J-Tech.
Okay.
J-Tech, J-Tech is disruptive. We get that out of the laboratory. It's like, McHugh, our CEO, always says that, it's the only company or project he's ever been involved in where he won't have any trouble finding customers, because there's a great need for what we're doing, and so it's not a situation where we're having to push someone else out or beat someone else out. I would also go as far to say is that was the idea with the battery as well. It was intended to be a game changer. I tell people that Super Soaker spoiled me. If I get involved in something, I want to take it to another level, and I don't want to go get involved in a company where it's a me too, and I'm having to elbow a little competitive space or niche or something like that. I want to have a whole different ballgame. And that's basically where J-Tech and the battery technologies are.
So we're in a class of our own in J-Tech,
that's
pretty
right.
much. You're creating the industry.
The other battery technology that I have been working on over the years, the lithium-air battery, which came out of my work with the solid-state battery when I realized that I could have a solid electrolyte that would protect lithium and still react with lithium in the ambient air. And that battery has a potential for 10 times the energy of lithium ion. So think of a car going 3,000 miles instead of 300 miles. Mm-hmm. That's the technology that I'm working on, and I have ideas for how to make that work.
Wow. I love the ideas, because a lot of people see STEM and they just think zeros, ones, logic, that, but it takes a lot of creativity too. There's art to what you keep coming up with over and over and over.
There's a lot of vision.
Yeah, a lot of you got to be a visionary for some of this stuff.
Lots of vision, and then figuring out how to turn vision into reality, and even seeing what, like I said, with the working on the battery and having a background in mechanical engineering and knowing how engines work, and figuring out how to turn battery technology into engine technology, which is what basically the J-Tech merging thermodynamics and electrochemistry. Mm-hmm. That's why it's a new space.
Right. And by the way, I didn't say J-Tech stands for Johnson Thermal Electrical
Converter.
Chemical converter. Okay, electrochemical converter. Right. I love that you put your name in it, because then it's live far beyond you. Once this thing is everywhere.
Well, it's, again, my part of, historically, I became very sensitive to the growing up in the South and knowing that I've had ancestors who did not and have not gotten credit for contributions that they've made. And growing up in pre-integration and all the trauma that we went through with that, and how angry people were about the prospect of integration even, and being fearful of us as a people. And you see some of that coming out now too, which is sad to see. Mm-hmm. But I wanted people to know that we make meaningful contributions, and I wanted to have, I put my name on it because I didn't want to have a situation where people would be able to deny where it came from, mm-hmm. what people created this. Even after Super Soaker, people, I've seen the full gamut. There have been people who said, "Boy, Super Soaker was invented by, that's the only thing black people ever came up with." I'm like, yeah. And then at the other extreme, was made a presentation to some kids back when Super Soaker first came out, and I was talking to some middle school kids, mm-hmm. and about, it was the high school kids, come to think of it, and they looked at me and said, "You didn't invent that." They didn't believe me. I'm like, okay, what do you do? But yeah, the idea that we as a people, need to acknowledge that there are a lot of very meaningful and important contributions that we have made and continue to make mm-hmm. in this country. And I will say that also when Obama came into the presidency, that was right after a lot of people will remember that we had the housing crash. The entire global market was crashing. Mm-hmm. And we led that crash because of decisions that people on Wall Street had been making, these subprime loans on housing, and putting people in predatory loans, putting people into houses that they couldn't afford. Mm-hmm. And basically we're not doing credit checks and things like that. And just, we ended up crashing the entire market. The whole world was in an economic, and we needed somebody super smart to pull us out of that mess. Mm-hmm. And so Obama was, I think if things were rosy and people weren't worried about anything, he may not have gotten elected. Mm-hmm. Right now, well, after that, COVID again, we were in trouble. The country was in trouble. Mm-hmm. And Biden was brought in with Kamala. And now we're in a situation where people are struggling to figure out, and I hear people talking all the time about, well, I'm not sure. I was just listening on the radio about, well, I'm having trouble finding a job, or I can't make enough money to support me, and all of these things, and I'm not sure that's the right person to vote for. I'm frustrated with the Democrats and so on. My concern, quite frankly, is if you vote for this person on one side, there's a pretty good chance in 2028 you'll get to vote again, and you get to choose. Mm-hmm. And if you don't like the way things are going, you get to vote again. That may not be the case if you get the wrong person.
Right.
You may not have another chance to vote. Mm-hmm. And people have to figure out who,
mm-hmm. Do the math.
Who would has respect for the norms and the limitations, and who does not.
Mm-hmm. Now, are you familiar with Black Enterprise Magazine?
Yes.
Right. Earl Graves Jr., actually, I listened to him talk about black business and where we can improve, right? And one of the things he said was, excuse me, is that a lot of black people don't tap into, or we underutilize mergers, acquisitions, and partnerships. That's a lot of us we just compete with each other, and we don't say, hey, let's just put these businesses together, grow together. But you decided it was a good idea to partner with Mr. Mike McCrary and say, I can build this business with him together. He has his resources, assets, experience. I have my expertise, knowledge, know-how. We can do this thing together, grow it into something special. So where did the mindset come from to say, I can work with somebody?
A lot of it is just, again, paying my tuition over the years and realizing that, there are things that I don't understand I need to learn.
Right.
And bringing people in, expertise who do know. And this whole thing about raising money, for example, Mike is one person, but we've got on the battery side, we've got some people over there as well who, these guys have relationships and friends who have resources. They can call them up and say, got this company in here, I'm raising a few $1 million, and everybody chips in.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way they roll. And so I'm learning a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I'm learning a lot. On the battery side, for example, when we learned how to do that, and we started networking, and we're doing that big time on the battery side. Magic Johnson, for example, just made a major investment in the battery company.
Wow.
Miles Garrett as well.
Another Johnson.
We joke with each other. This is Johnson Magic.
Yeah, Magic Johnson.
The Johnsons are making magic. Yeah, so it's kind of a cool play. But yeah, I'm really, really excited about that relationship, and even some of the things we're now starting to launch with Tuskegee, setting up a research institute on campus there that where we can actually nurture and develop technology, and do game-changing technology, not just things on research on that other people are researching. When I was in school, I had a research project that I was working on as a grad student and to help earn some income. I was making high temperature density measurements of alkali metals using nuclear radiation attenuation. That was the title of the project.
That's for all us nerds. That's for the nerds. Yeah, love it.
But sending gamma rays through a molten lithium, potassium to measure its density change as you go up in temperature. Because those liquid metals were being looked at as coolant instead of water in nuclear reactors. And so gathering that data. But that was gathering data. That was making measurements. Mm-hmm. That's different from creating something new and developing a new technology. Right. So what we're looking at is putting an institute at Tuskegee that will introduce new technology, game-changing technology. So as opposed to just doing, I want to call it basic R&D.
Mm-hmm. Because you're good because you're in the military, and we know military is good with acronyms. So you got JTech, you had JSAC. You still got that?
Yeah.
You got all these different. So what are we calling Tuskegee? Was it Johnson Innovation
We
Lab?
haven't named it yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but we're at the very beginning of that.
Oh, okay.
So it's been having very good discussions with Dr. Brown.
That'd be amazing.
Who, by the way, is a retired two-star general.
Okay.
So we know what that's like.
Yeah, connection. We got a connection.
Yeah.
How are people finding out about this battery technology? Like, how did Magic Johnson find out to say, hey, I want to invest in that guy?
Relationships.
Okay.
Actually, that came by Brandon Martin. Brandon's a brother who is connected with everybody. He's been in the energy space for a while. He was working with Acon in Lighting Africa. Mm-hmm. He was the COO, his boots on the ground, who was really running all those projects, and was introduced to him. And he's been a great ally. He's really been pulling together investments and taking things to another level.
Mm-hmm. I love that you have done pretty much everything that all of us need to figure out. Inventing, engineering, military, college, partnerships, friendships, networking. Everything that we say black businesses need to do, we could just read your biography and just say, let's just follow what he did.
Interesting.
Just copy him. That's what so this is a funny thing. You know, when the lottery first hit $1 billion, right? And I felt like I have a dream. I want to hit this lottery, get $1 billion. When people say, what would you do with your money? Some people say, I'm going to buy a bunch of real estate. Some people say all type of stuff. the number one thing I always, since last 10 years, I said, I'm going to find a way to find Mr. Lonnie Johnson, and I want to invest in a battery factory in my hometown. Wow. That was what I've been wanting to do that since it first hit $1 billion. I said, when I get this money, even though I never won, right? But I said, when I get this money, I'm going to see if I can convince him to build a manufacturing facility. I'm from Youngstown, Ohio, in my hometown.
You know what's funny about that? I haven't bought any. I've maybe bought in my life maybe 3 or 4 lottery tickets. Because I haven't wanted to win the lottery.
Right.
I wanted to succeed, because if I won the lottery, then the statement that I want to make, that black folk make meaningful contributions to this country. Oh, he's just lucky.
Right.
He's got that, because
try to take it from
I
him.
didn't want people to have an excuse to not give credit where credit's due in terms of what we do as a people.
You won the genetic neurological lottery. You won the cognitive lottery. That's the lottery you won. It was natural for you. How did you choose
I
it?
like to think that the things that I've done is just not having sense enough to give up. I mean, think of a battery for 25 years. What sense does that make?
So you got persistence.
Or one project for 20, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Come on, and even spending all your resources. But, you know, when I talk sometimes to kids, it's like, I use this example, you know, and I talk to parents too about kids, and saying that, you know, be careful of the feedback you give, because kids are using that feedback to form their self-identity. And I use an example of a snowball rolling down a hill. As it gets further down, it gets bigger and bigger, right? And so that's what kids are like. And as they roll down this hill, if they're getting negative feedback and, well, you can't do this, you don't do this right, you're getting harsh punishment because you made a mistake or you messed up, and you start labeling you and calling you bad, you know, all of a sudden, this is who I am. I'm going to be, and pride steps in. I'm going to be the baddest. I'm going to be the best. But on the other hand, if you're getting positive feedback, boy, you're so smart. You do this right. And all of a sudden, you get this self-confidence, and you start setting goals for yourself. The success becomes addictive, and you want more of it. And so you work harder, and you're even willing to take more risks. It's like anything else that's addictive. Failure can be addictive. Success can be addictive as well.
I agree fully. I stopped calling kids bad a long time ago. I realized the outcomes.
Right. You're giving them a self-image that you don't want to share. You don't want them to have. Always see good in them and lift up the positive aspects. And, that's so important.
A lot of people look at positive reinforcement as meaning what they're saying is positive. Positive reinforcement really means affirmation. Whatever they're doing, if you say you're this, that's also considered positive. It's going to add to whatever they're doing, negative or positive. And so I agree with that fully. How did you choose Atlanta? What was it about Atlanta?
Wasn't so hard. I was going through a divorce at the time. My ex-wife's family's in South Carolina. My family's in Mobile. This is in the middle. Yeah. I didn't want to live in a small town. I wanted to have access to resources, technology, and even talent. So Atlanta made a lot of sense.
You got Morehouse, the whole AUC right there. You got Georgia Tech. Right. You got Southern Poly, which is now Kennesaw State, right there, Georgia State. You got a lot of talent just right here in the city. I heard you say you did a good interview with Vault Empowers earlier this year, I think it was. I watched that, and it was a great interview. And you talked about how when you first got here, your facility was in the middle of 2 projects, between 2 project houses, Capitol Homes, and what was the other one?
And Capitol Homes and Grady Homes.
Grady Homes. So, and you talked about manufacturing. You thought you could bring manufacturing to this area. Right. And where did that mindset come from? Because I thought the same thing, but where does it come from for you?
That came from Dr. Irons. Dr. Irons was a dean of business at Clark Atlanta. Met him early on when I first came to Atlanta, and he would tell me a lot of true economic development. It's one thing to have business and you're trading and doing services within a community, but if you can and a lot of times that's like you actually having to bring product into the community, so you're shipping wealth out and bringing product in to provide a service. True economic development is when you can produce a product and ship that product out and bring wealth in by selling the product out. So that was my vision, was to set up battery manufacturing there in the middle of two public housing projects and produce jobs so that we would have true economic development. So that was my vision. Of course, the demographics have changed dramatically over the 25 years since I had that vision. But the mission is still there, because when you can control the technology, which is what the intellectual property allows you to do with patents and so forth, you can also control where the benefits go. Yes. And so in depressed areas, creating jobs still is a real important driver for me.
Mm-hmm. So manufacturing, you wanted to bring that's amazing. I actually hope that could still happen.
Oh yeah, we're well on our way. In fact, for the battery, we're going to set up a prototype manufacturing line. I call it a prototype of phase one, but a small manufacturing line, so that when we can use that to produce batteries that we can send out for potential customers and clients to test. And once they say, oh yeah, this works really well and satisfies our need, then you can get the resources to scale it to an even larger manufacturing capability. So both projects, the JTech as well as the battery company, they're both envisioned as multi-billion-dollar initiatives. So the upside is huge. Huge.
We're talking, and at this point, with the energy demand in the world, it's a trillion.
I talk about, this whole issue of global warming and climate change. If you look at the data, the transition, when the upturn started in temperature was in the 1800s, back during the Western world industrial revolution, when we started using coal instead of wood, and we started then petroleum and so forth, and so the CO2 level in the atmosphere rose, and the average temperature of the Earth started rising at the same time. So that data is there; it's just as plain as day. So that's why when the U.S. withdrew from the Paris Climate Accord, it made no sense to me. It was just a stupid thing to do. So I started saying that to say that a lot of there's still a lot of under-industrialized areas in the world, particularly Africa and other third world countries, and you can't go through industrialization the way the U.S. did, the way the West, you're not using fossil fuels as your primary energy source. So we need to really bring renewable energy technology to bear and make it available globally, so that we don't make the path that we're on worse.
And that'd be amazing if the manufacturing could happen right here and we export.
Yeah,
that would be amazing. Now, we got to bring it full circle, because you talked about economic empowerment and you went to Tuskegee, and that was Booker T. Washington's whole thing. And that's what him and Du Bois were arguing about. It was, hey, do we go the talented 10th route, or do we go, let's get jobs, let's manufacture, let's agriculture, and then you come and say, I can do both, and I want to manufacture too. So
I think in terms of manufacturing for this, where we locate plants, this is a global need, and what I envision is factories all over the world, literally. So I don't think one factory will supply the demand, quite frankly.
Right.
This is just too great a need.
For sure.
So there'll be a lot of hopefully will impact a lot of areas. But we're not there yet, but we're on path, on course.
Like GM, they got factories all over the world manufacturing cars everywhere.
Right.
So we want the GM.
We got to be where the car factories are if we're going to put batteries in cars, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we want our JTech factory that's doing residential batteries. We want the JTech factory doing industrial-sized utility company size JTEX.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
Yeah. No sense in thinking small.
Exactly. I'm thinking big. So you did all of this while balancing the family. Difficult, I'm sure, very difficult.
Very difficult.
Did the family live here at all at any point?
Well, the CTO of JTEC, the company here, my oldest son.
Really?
My other son and daughter both work at the battery company.
Amazing.
So I get to hang out with them. Fortunately, I get to see them every day, which is a blessing.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I could spend more time with them, but just having them around,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a blessing. My youngest daughter is still in school. She's not in not in the adult world yet, so she's still a student.
Okay. So you just checked another box of black business things that we all need to do. Your kids went into the same business.
I mean, they don't have, I mean, I certainly would like, I'm hopeful that my youngest daughter will be an entrepreneur, whether she's in the business or not.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if she will
Nice.
eventually give in, but she's been avoiding it, so
Mm-hmm.
I'm okay with that. But I do want her to have a productive role in life.
Yeah. This is amazing. You got 3 kids in the business right now.
Right.
You got a multi-generational business already. We're not even in the market yet.
Right.
Amazing. I didn't want to take any more of your time, and I appreciate everything. Do you have any good words you want to leave our viewers with? Some advice, young engineers, young inventors?
I think, what I said earlier about we're all inventors.
Mm-hmm.
The difference is perseverance, following your vision, pursue it. And the other thing I would suggest that I think you pointed out, but didn't highlight, is that I do have multiple projects going in parallel. That's because there's so many things that are outside your control that can impact you. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it's mitigating risk by putting the odds of success in your favor. Because there's just so many things. Having a vision for an invention, for example, and then building it. The water gun is a good example. When I put it together for the first time and seeing how it would work, I had a vision for how it would work, but I could have run into a problem that said, okay, the water gets choked at this point, and you can't really get a big, powerful stream out. But so Mother Nature. It's our job to figure out what Mother Nature will do, as opposed to her complying with our visions.
Right.
Another example, I invented a little doll, a little dancing doll. We call her ballerina, which was like magic. But that was another toy that was not successful. And I had an airplane, a water-propelled airplane, that was not successful. I think the airplane is a good example. So when I built a water gun and I would play with it or use it, and I pulled the trigger, I felt a little bit of a recoil because of the water. And I was sensitive. Most people probably wouldn't notice that, but I noticed it. I said, that's a little bit of propulsion here. And I did the analysis. Oh, yeah, there's some thrust. So I built an airplane and put a little bottle in it and pressed the compressed air in there, and it would propel the water out the back, and it would fly. And it was called a jamming jet. Laramie Intertech manufactured it.
Mm.
Spent $1 million in TV commercials. The plane flew great.
Mm-hmm.
When they were going into production, one of the engineers decided that they wanted to have the plane fly in a circle instead of straight, so the kids wouldn't lose it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But flying in a circle, one wing would move faster than the other through the air to get more lift, and would roll over and dive into the ground.
Right.
So they manufactured 60,000 airplanes.
With his idea.
$1 million in TV, and every one of them had that design flaw. The company eventually went bankrupt because they were making other bad decisions too. Mm. But this is part of my journey,
Mm-hmm.
It's a failure that, that was not in my control.
Right.
It had nothing to do with the quality of the invention or engineering or how it should have performed. It was just some egghead who thought he knew better. I had to, of course, experience a disappointment because of that, even though it had nothing to do with me personally.
Mm-hmm.
So you know, put the odds in your favor, persevere multiple paths, and apply yourself, because that's the only way to succeed.
That's the only way to succeed. Let me fortify this thought that you said. You said to mitigate risk by stacking the odds
in your favor.
That
means multiple projects,
yes.
more than one thing at a time. You know, sometimes I talk to inventors, they've got this little baby, and it's their precious thing. Sometimes I look at it and I say, it's not a great idea. But it's their thing, and they're excited about it. And I say, well, pursue it. You know. Mm-hmm. But I try to encourage people to have multiple projects, because you don't know how it's going to be received.
Right.
And one of the things that with the JTEC and even the battery, what's important there is making sure that you're focused on a problem. Mm-hmm. You're solving a problem where there's a real need, as opposed to having something that I got out of toys because it was so subjective. You can have a great toy, you can make the magic. If the price wasn't right or other people didn't appreciate it, it's so subjective. You don't know. But here you're addressing a critical need, an important need, you know, for human survival and prosperity.
Nice. I appreciate your time. We had the best video crew in the business. This is 404 Creators right here. That's Warren right there. You met him. Best video crew in the business. I hope you enjoyed yourself. This is like
Thank you.
You know, like I said, top of the list. This was my favorite interview before I even did it. I just top of the line. All right.
Thanks.
And Mr. Johnson, Mr. Lonnie Johnson, Black history icon, whether he wants to call himself that or not, we'll call him that. Legend, engineer, black business mogul, whether he calls himself that or not. And just dad, multi-generational, I mean, just too many things to talk about. And that's all we got for you, man. Thank you guys for enjoying this interview with me today. Perfect.
Thank you.